Hello everyone, today I want to talk to you about a former senior US official revealing that Trump might trade away Taiwan. In addition, Lai Ching-te is stubbornly pushing forward, heading straight into a brick wall. In Taiwan's second round of recall votes, the Democratic Progressive Party suffered a complete defeat, ignoring the tariff crisis and now having to pay a heavy price. The Lai Ching-te administration in Taiwan is rushing to launch this with the aim of eliminating the opposition's large-scale recall efforts. In the first round of voting on July 26th, public opinion overwhelmingly crushed them by a margin of 25-0. At that time, the targets for recall were 4 opposition Kuomintang legislators, as well as the Taiwan People's Party's mayor of Hsinchu in the Kaohsiung case, but the effort ended in complete failure. By the second round of large-scale recall voting on August 23rd, the Lai Ching-te administration once again faced a 7-0 result. Not a single one of the 7 opposition Kuomintang legislators targeted for recall was successfully removed. Combined, the 2 rounds resulted in a total recall score of 32-0. According to a report by China Times News Network, within just 10 minutes of vote counting on August 23rd, the votes against recalling the 7 Kuomintang legislators had already far surpassed the recall votes. In the end, the margin was nearly 2-1. This time, the 6 wins were more decisive than the previous losses. The closest margin was still about 30,000 votes, while the largest gap was nearly 50,000 votes, making public sentiment clear. Most Taiwanese believe that at this moment, launching a large-scale recall that wastes public resources is pointless, particularly after the Democratic Progressive Party suffered a complete defeat. Lai Ching-te failed to recognize the need to cut losses and insisted on proceeding with the second recall, making it unnecessary. As a result, they were taught a lesson by public opinion. In reality, it was foolish. The DPP authorities initiated the large-scale recall to break the deadlock in the Legislative Yuan, controlled by the opposition KMT and TPP. They did so under the political banner of resisting China and protecting Taiwan. The first large-scale recall, launched on July 26th, was ostensibly initiated by a civil society group, but in reality, it was led by Kei Chien-ming, the DPP caucus convener, businessman Cao Xing-cheng, and DPP legislator Shen Po-yang. On the surface, the DPP government claims to respect public opinion and demonstrate democracy, which is why they support the large-scale recall. Kei Chien-ming, Cao Xing-cheng, and Shen Po-yang are essentially a trio that brings disaster to Taiwan. However, after the complete defeat in the July 16th vote, even Cao Xing-cheng, the main driving force behind the large-scale recall, realized the tide had turned and took the initiative to advise the DPP's recall groups to abandon the second round of recall voting scheduled for August 23rd. But Lai Ching-te was stubborn and opposed canceling the August 23rd large-scale recall vote. Instead, he personally took command and mobilized the entire party for battle, only to suffer another crushing defeat, a second total wipeout. After the DPP suffered this disastrous defeat of 0-32, KMT legislator Yu Shu-hui posted on Facebook, writing 32 characters as a message to the DPP, greater democracy, more rejection. All that effort was for nothing. Wasting August in stagnation and alienating the people, lacking both ability and virtue, sooner or later, the truth will come to light. She believes that these mass recalls have thrown society into chaos, turned the cabinet into a state of paralysis, and caused deep divisions among the public. The price paid is simply too high. However, the real joke is that the mastermind, Lai Ching-te, refuses to take responsibility, using the situation to make an example of the Minister of Economic Affairs. After learning the results, Lai Ching-te held a press conference. He stated that it has been a year and 3 months since he took office, and the administration will conduct a thorough self-examination of any governance shortcomings, making necessary adjustments and changes. He stated that the cabinet will initiate necessary personnel reshuffles to make the team more efficient and ensure that government policies have a greater impact. He also said that Premier Cho Jung-tai had tendered his resignation multiple times after the first round of voting on July 26th, but considering that tariff negotiations have yet to be finalized and post-typhoon recovery is still ongoing, with many major policies requiring steady advancement, he hopes Cho Jung-tai will continue to hold his post and shoulder these important responsibilities. Lai Ching-te merely offered up the so-called Minister of Economic Affairs, Kuo Tzu-hui, as a scapegoat. On the eve of the vote on the night of August 22nd, Kuo Tzu-hui spoke out through the Ministry of Economic Affairs group chat, announcing his resignation due to health reasons. In the past, Kuo Tzu-hui often claimed that he drank Perch Essence every day and was in excellent health, but now he suddenly cites health reasons for his resignation. The timing is intriguing and is seen as the DPP's last-ditch effort to save votes before the election. In recent months, Taiwan has been hit hard by US tariffs. After the US hollowed out TSMC, it still imposed a 20% tariff on Taiwan, causing widespread complaints in the industry. The DPP always thought that the US would show special favor and only impose minimal tariffs on Taiwan. On April 1st, on the eve of Trump's first announcement of global tariffs, Lai Ching-te, the DPP caucus convener, even declared on April Fool's Day that if the US imposed tariffs on Taiwan, it would be at most 10%. But the very next day, Trump announced the first wave of tariffs on Taiwan, an increase of 32%. At that time, the DPP was already being criticized for its complete lack of vigilance toward the United States. And Guo Jihui, the so-called Minister of Economic Affairs, who was originally a business owner when the US was gradually establishing tariffs on various regions in July, right at a critical moment for Taiwan's tariff negotiations with the US. Even though Guo Jihui was not part of Taiwan's US trade negotiation team, the Ministry of Economic Affairs oversees international trade. Yet, when Guo Jihui went south to communicate with Taiwan's industry representatives, he came out and relayed the industry's message that tariffs were not important. So how were the Taiwanese negotiators on the front lines with the US supposed to handle this? While the people of Taiwan were extremely dissatisfied with the heavy tariffs imposed by the United States, Lai Ching-te was single-mindedly focused on playing politics and orchestrating a massive recall. Lai Ching-te tried to stir up controversy around Guo Jihui on the eve of the second round of the recall vote in an attempt to save votes, but none of it had any effect. In fact, the one who should resign the most is Lai Ching-te. On August 12, according to a TVBS poll, Lai Ching-te's approval rating was only 28%, and the relevant figure from the 76 poll was also just 30%. A 28% approval rating is already at the level of a government on the verge of stepping down. Most importantly, Trump's attitude of abandoning Taiwan is very clear, yet Lai Ching-te blindly relies on the US in his pursuit of independence and refuses to change his mindset, which is a cause for obvious concern. The Lai Ching-te administration deliberately tries to curry favor with the United States, and he wanted to transit through the US, but was directly rejected by the American side. However, his efforts to please the United States can be described as relentless. He raised Taiwan's 2026 defense budget to 3% of GDP and claimed that by 2030 he would follow NATO standards and increase the defense budget to 5% of GDP. He is pouring the hard-earned tax money of the Taiwanese people into an arms buildup that only intensifies cross-strait tensions. When more pragmatic countries in the EU, such as Spain and Hungary, are doing their best not to increase their defense budgets as the US demands, Lai Ching-te, on the other hand, doesn't listen at all and instead takes the initiative to boost defense. Honestly, just looking at this is quite laughable. In reality, the US only bullies the weak and fears the strong. The more you try to please it, the more it takes advantage of you. During the tariff negotiations with the US, Taiwan offered no resistance and agreed to move half of TSMC to America. The authorities, unable to cope, could only try to deceive the public. As a result, the US imposed an additional 20% tariff on Taiwan, leaving 42,000 workers on the island facing unemployment and dealing a heavy blow to 80% of traditional industries and domestic demand sectors. Taiwan's response was even worse than that of Japan and South Korea. Japan and South Korea at least managed to negotiate the US tariff down to just 15%. Even Americans could see Taiwan's predicament, saying that Taiwan could be sold out by Trump at any moment. Former US Vice President National Security Advisor Philip Gordon recently wrote an article in Foreign Policy, warning that if Trump returns to the White House, his highly transactional and unpredictable diplomatic style could turn Taiwan into a bargaining chip in negotiations. In his article, Gordon mentioned that military pressure on Taiwan has already become routine, with actions escalating from crossing the median line to encircling Taiwan with military exercises to continuous missile tests. Although Xi Jinping may not resort to force against Taiwan without cause, if he perceives that the US commitment is weakening and the costs are manageable, he may still take action. Gordon specifically pointed out several recent warning signs. Lai Ching-te was denied a transit stop in the United States. The so-called visit by the Minister of Defense to the US was rejected. The US has allowed the sale of advanced chips to mainland China, and the US has imposed a 20% high tariff on Taiwan, higher than the 15% imposed on Japan, South Korea, and Europe. All of this highlights Taiwan's increasingly vulnerable position. In response, Gordon offered some advice. He said that Taiwan's leadership should be cautious and measured on the issue of independence, so as to avoid provoking Beijing. If the US-Taiwan relationship becomes unbalanced, there could even be a decision to use Taiwan as a bargaining chip in negotiations with mainland China, and the consequences would be quite disastrous. Meanwhile, Taiwanese professor Yong Lijong, who lives in the US, interpreted Gordon's article on Facebook on August 13th, saying that Gordon reflects the perspective of Democratic Party elites and is reminding Taiwan to be even more cautious during the Trump era. Yong Lijong said that Gordon warns Taiwan may be put on the negotiating table between China and the US, and that under Washington's broader framework of seeking a summit with Chinese leaders, Taiwan's interests risk being marginalized. To sum it up, first, Lai Ching-te and these Taiwan independent supporters have internalized using the US to resist China to their core. Even after the US government shifted its stance, and despite harsh US tariffs, they ignored the economy and people's livelihoods, stubbornly pushing political agendas and continuing large-scale recalls, which led to a disastrous defeat. Second, Lai Ching-te is similar to Germany's ruling Christian Democratic Union politicians. He only focuses on politics, trying to boost his weak public approval by being anti-China. However, he fails to manage the economy, resulting in his approval ratings plummeting, yet he still doesn't know how to turn things around. Third, Gordon, a former US official close to the Democratic Party, pointed out that Trump's transactional nature means not only could he take advantage of Taiwan, but he could also trade Taiwan away at any moment.